She laughed to her sisters. "I'll bleed his accounts dry." I said nothing. I'd been invisible for 30 years. But her mother knew exactly who I was, and she'd been quietly making sure everyone else would find out too. My name is Harold Easton. I'm 62 years old. I've spent the better part of 4 decades working the land, first as a hired agronomist on other men's farms, then as a full partner in my mother-in-law's operation out in Callaway County, Kentucky. Marlene Bell built something real out here. 340 acres of certified organic cropland, a co-op charter with 12 participating farms, and a name that meant something at every farmer's market from Paducah to Louisville. I helped build it. I was there when the drainage system failed in '98 and we lost the East Field. I was there when the co-op nearly dissolved in 2004 over a contract dispute with a regional distributor. I fixed both problems quietly, without fanfare, without a single news article or a plaque on the wall. Karen never came to the field. Not once in 31 years of marriage. We have 3 kids. Chance is 33. Our oldest son, sharp as a tack when he wants to be, but he's had Karen's voice in his ears since he could walk. Taylor is 28. Our daughter, quieter than her brother, watches everything. And then there's Zach, 27 years old. He came to us when he was 5, after Karen's younger sister Alice and her husband were killed on I-24 during a November ice storm. 3 cars, a jackknifed semi, and 2 good people gone in under a minute. The other 2 sisters, Cindy and Rita, both made their regrets known from a safe distance. Said they didn't have the room. Said it wasn't the right time. I didn't ask Karen twice. I just drove to the foster placement office, signed the forms, and brought Zach home on a Thursday afternoon. He was sitting in a plastic chair, holding a paper bag with everything he owned. I still think about that bag sometimes. Marlene watched all of it. She didn't say much. She was never the type, but she watched. The night everything shifted was a Friday in October, 3 weeks before Marlene passed. The harvest was in. I'd spent the day reviewing yield reports at the co-op office and came home to find Karen, Cindy, and Rita already settled in around the fire pit out back, wine glasses filled, voices loose. I didn't interrupt. I poured myself a cup of coffee in the kitchen and stepped out onto the side porch, which wraps around far enough that I could hear them clearly without being seen. I wasn't trying to eavesdrop. I just needed some air. "She can't last much longer," Cindy was saying. "Dr. Parrish said 2 weeks, maybe 3. Then we need to be ready." That was Rita, clipped and precise, even with half a bottle of Chardonnay in her. "I've already talked to Dalton. He says as long as the original will holds, we're looking at a 3-way split. Land, co-op shares the house, all of it." Karen swirled her glass and leaned back in her chair. "Harold's going to make a fuss." Cindy laughed, that high, thin sound she made when she thought something was funnier than it actually was. "Let him fuss. What's he going to do?" "Nothing," Karen said. The word landed flat and certain, like she'd already run the numbers. "He's an employee, basically. Always has been. I'll bleed his accounts dry before he even figures out which courthouse to walk into." She raised her glass toward her sisters, to Mom, and to finally collecting what's ours. They drank. The fire popped. I stood on that porch with my coffee going cold and didn't move for a long time. Employee, 31 years. A boy in a plastic chair with a paper bag. A drainage system rebuilt in January mud. And I was an employee. I set the mug down on the porch railing without a sound. Went inside, walked past the living room without a word, and climbed the stairs to the small office I kept locked at the end of the hall. Inside the closet, behind a row of hanging winter coats, sat a fireproof box I'd been adding to for the better part of a decade. Deeds, trust amendments, proxy records, an email chain between Marlene and her original attorney going back to 2009. Photographs, receipts, notarized statements. I unlocked the box, pulled out a fresh legal pad, and sat down at the desk. 31 years of being background, of being the man nobody saw. They were about to see me. People around Callaway County knew Marlene Bell the way you know a landmark. She was part of the geography. Born on that farm, raised on it, buried her husband on it, and spent the next 30 years turning it into something that outlasted grief. When I first came to work her fields in the spring of 1991, I was 29 years old with a degree in agronomy, a used pickup truck, and exactly no illusions about how hard this kind of work was going to be. Marlene didn't hire me because I was impressive. She hired me because I showed up on time, asked smart questions, and didn't flinch when she told me the south drainage had been wrong for 6 years, and every contractor she brought in had made it worse. I spent 4 days walking that field with a level and a notebook before I said a single word about a solution. She watched me from the fence line the whole time, never interrupted. When I finally came back to her with a plan, she read through my notes twice, folded the pages, and said, "Start Monday." That was how we worked for the next 3 decades. No speeches, just work. Karen came into the picture about a year after I started. She drove out one Sunday afternoon, city shoes and all, to visit her mother, and I happened to be repairing a section of fence along the access road. We talked for maybe 10 minutes. She was charming in the way people are, when they're performing charm rather than actually feeling it, but I didn't know that yet. I was 30. I thought the flutter in my chest was instinct rather than warning. We married in 1993. Marlene came to the wedding in a blue dress and sensible shoes and danced exactly once, with me, to a Patsy Cline song. I've thought about that dance a lot over the years. The first decade was fine, not extraordinary, but workable. Karen had her routines, her friends, her sisters visiting on long weekends. I had the farm. We had Chance in 92, Taylor in 97. When Alice and her husband died in 2003 and we brought Zach home, Karen was decent about it for about 2 years. She fed him, clothed him, helped with homework. Then something shifted, and Zach gradually became my project, my responsibility, my shadow. He followed me to the equipment barn on Saturday mornings before he could properly read. He knew the difference between a field cultivator and a disc harrow by the time he was 8. Marlene used to say he had farmer's eyes, always measuring the sky. It was Marlene who first told me, about 4 years ago, that she was worried about what would happen to the farm after she was gone. We were sitting at her kitchen table in January, the kind of cold that gets into the walls, and she slid a folder across the table without preamble. "I updated my documents," she said simply. I opened the folder. There were several pages, co-op charter amendments, a revised trustee designation, and a notarized addendum I read 3 times before I fully understood it. My name appeared in a clause I had helped draft years earlier, now expanded, significantly expanded. "Marlene," I started. "Don't," she cut in, not unkindly. "You've been the only reliable person in this operation for 20 years. I'm not going to apologize for recognizing that in writing." I closed the folder and held it in both hands. Karen will contest this. Marlene looked at me steadily. Karen doesn't know this version exists. Norman does. The registry in Franklin County does. That's enough. She poured more coffee into both her cups. I've watched my girls long enough to know what they'll do the moment I'm gone. I'm not leaving this land to appetites. I carried that folder home and locked it in the fireproof box behind the winter coats. Never mentioned it to Karen. Never mentioned it to anyone except Norman himself. When I called his office the following week to confirm every filing was in order, he confirmed it in that careful, unhurried way of his and added, "She was very specific about what she wanted, Harold. I've been practicing law 41 years. I've rarely seen a client more clear-eyed." I thought about that conversation again the morning after I overheard Karen and her sisters at the fire pit. I sat at my desk until nearly midnight, going through the box. Everything was there. The amended trust, the co-op proxy assignment, the Franklin County Registry confirmation stamped and dated, the photographs from the East Field rebuild, me, knee-deep in January mud, while Karen was in Gatlinburg for a girls' weekend. Marlene had taken some of those photos herself, from the fence line. I hadn't known that until she gave them to me. At the bottom of the box, underneath everything else, was an envelope I hadn't put there. Marlene must have slipped it in during one of my visits when I'd left the room. My name was on the front in her handwriting. Careful, deliberate, the cursive of a woman who learned penmanship before keyboards existed. I didn't open it that night. I wasn't ready. Instead, I added one item to the box. My phone, with a new audio file recorded the previous evening. 41 minutes of Karen, Cindy, and Rita talking beside the fire. Clear as a church bell. I'll bleed his accounts dry. Karen's voice, unhurried and certain. I labeled the file, locked the box, and went to bed. I slept better than I had in years. Marlene had been shrinking for months. That's the only word that fits. Not just physically, though that was happening too, her frame folding inward like a harvest gone dry, but in some larger sense, like the space she occupied in the world was being quietly gathered back in. She knew it. She didn't complain about it. That was Marlene all over. I drove out to her farmhouse on a Tuesday in late October, 3 days after the fire pit conversation. I brought a thermos of beef broth and a loaf of the sourdough she liked from the bakery on Route 68. The home health aide, a steady woman named Gloria who had been with Marlene for 8 months, met me at the door and told me she was having a decent morning. Alert, sitting up, had eaten some breakfast. That counted as good news at this stage. Marlene was in the high-back chair by the window when I came in, a wool blanket across her lap, watching the east field through the glass. The field had been cut and tilled for winter. Clean rows running all the way to the tree-line. She turned when she heard my boots on the hardwood. "You brought the sourdough," she said. Not a question. Every time. I set the bag on the side table and poured broth into the mug I kept in her cabinet for my visits. She accepted it with both hands and took a careful sip. We sat together for a while without talking. That was one of the things I'd always valued about Marlene. She didn't treat silence like a problem to be solved. The field was gray and quiet outside. A red-tailed hawk was working the fence line along the south edge. After a while she asked, without turning from the window, "Is the box still where it should be?" "It is," I replied. She nodded slowly. I added something. "Before Gloria moved in, when I could still get around the house on my own." A pause. "You'll find it at the bottom." I thought of the envelope with my name on it. I still hadn't opened it. "I know," I told her. She looked at me then, directly, with those gray eyes that had always seemed to be calculating 3 moves ahead. "Karen came by last week with Dalton Reeves, her attorney. She said the name the way you'd say bad weather. She brought him into my living room and had him explain the estate timeline to me, like I was confused about my own affairs." My jaw tightened. "What did you do?" The corner of her mouth moved. Not quite a smile, but close. I listened to every word. Then I told them I was tired and asked them to leave. She looked back at the field. Gloria showed them out. Karen didn't say goodbye. I set my mug down on the table beside hers. "Marlene, if you want me to." "I don't want you to do anything yet," she said firmly. "Let them think it's going the way they expect. That's important." She reached over and touched the back of my hand once, briefly, the way she might check the temperature of the soil. "Norman has everything he needs. Leonard in the adjacent filing has the backup. The only thing left is waiting." She paused, then added quietly, "And making sure Zach knows he's provided for." That landed harder than I expected. I looked at her. "He's in the amended co-op charter," she went on. "Not by name, by designation. The agronomist of record, which will be him once you formalize it." I had Norman write it that way on purpose. Clean and unchallengeable. She picked up her mug again. "That boy drove me to 4 doctor's appointments last spring. Did he tell you that?" He hadn't. I made a mental note to talk to Zach, though I already knew what he'd say, that it was no big deal, that she needed a ride, that it wasn't worth mentioning. I stayed 2 hours. We talked about the hawk, about the drainage improvements we'd made to the North Quadrant, about a co-op member named Dale Hutchins who was thinking of retiring, and what that would mean for the spring contracts. Ordinary things. Real things. When I stood to go, Marlene looked up at me from her chair with an expression I hadn't seen before. Not soft exactly, but settled. "You never asked for anything," she said. "In 30 years. "I didn't need to," I answered. "The work was enough." She nodded once, as if that confirmed something she'd suspected for a long time. I picked up my coat, walked to the door, and let myself out into the cold, gray afternoon. On the drive home, I called Norman's office. His assistant put me through immediately. "Norman," I said, "I need to confirm the Franklin County filing is properly cross-referenced with the co-op charter amendment." "It is," he answered without hesitation. "Triple-checked it myself last month at Marlene's request. Every document points to the same conclusion. And if they try to contest on grounds of diminished capacity..." A brief pause. Her physician filed a competency statement in September. Marlene insisted on it. She said, and I'm quoting directly here, "I want it on record that I knew exactly what I was doing." I exhaled through my nose and watched the county road unspool ahead of me. Bare trees, gray sky, the kind of November afternoon that looks like the whole world is holding its breath. "Thank you, Norman." "Harold." His voice was unhurried but precise. "Whatever happens next, you have a very solid foundation. Kara bought a necklace on a Thursday. I know the day because I was reviewing co-op contract renewals at the kitchen table when the delivery driver knocked, and Karen signed for a slim white box with a jeweler's name on the side before I could see who it was from. She didn't show me what was in it. She just carried it upstairs with that particular walk she had when she was pleased with herself. Chin up, shoulders back, like she was already practicing for something. I didn't ask. I went back to the contracts. Over the following 2 weeks, the packages kept coming. A set of Italian leather luggage, a new laptop with a monogram case, a pair of boots that cost more than my first truck payment. Karen stopped bothering to carry them upstairs before I saw them. She'd leave the boxes stacked near the front door like a statement, receipts tossed on the entry table without a second glance. One evening I picked up one of the receipts. The card number was from an account I didn't recognize. I set the receipt back down exactly where I found it. The next morning, while Karen was at her book club, the standing Thursday engagement she'd maintained for 11 years, I sat down at my desk and pulled up the financial records I kept separately from our joint accounts. I managed the farm's operating budget, the co-op distributions, and a series of investment accounts I'd built over 20 years of consistent returns. Karen knew the joint accounts existed. She did not know the full scope of what sat beside them. I was not hiding money. I was being careful. There's a difference, and it matters. What I found when I looked more closely was that our joint checking account had dropped by nearly $14,000 over the past 4 months in small, irregular withdrawals that didn't correspond to any household expense I could identify. Some were ATM pulls. Some were transfers to an account number I didn't recognize. None of them were large enough, individually, to trigger a flag. Together, they told a story. I printed the records, dated each page, and added them to the fireproof box. Then I called a retired paralegal I'd known for 15 years, a methodical woman named Carla Odom, who had handled document work for 2 of the co-op's founding members and whose discretion was, in my experience, ironclad. I need a full asset trace, I told her. Joint accounts, credit inquiries, anything filed in Karen's name in the last 5 years. Carla didn't ask unnecessary questions. Give me a week, she said. She called back in 4 days. There was a credit card account opened in Karen's name alone, 18 months prior. Current balance, just under $11,000. And there was a savings account in a bank 3 counties over with a balance of $62,000, funded by systematic transfers going back nearly 3 years. $62,000. Quiet as a field mouse. Steady as a drip. I thanked Carla, documented everything she'd sent, and locked the box again. That evening, Karen came home from what she said was lunch with Cindy and set a new handbag on the kitchen counter. She looked at it with satisfaction, then looked at me. Mother's doing worse, she said, as if reporting a weather update. Gloria thinks it's a matter of days. I know, I replied. I was there Tuesday. Something crossed her face, not grief, not guilt, more like mild irritation at being reminded I existed in that part of her world. She picked up the handbag and headed for the stairs. Try not to make things complicated, Harold, she said over her shoulder. When the time comes, just let the attorneys handle it. I watch her go. Let the attorneys handle it. I almost felt sorry for Dalton Reeves. Almost. Marlene Bell died on a Tuesday morning in early November, quietly, the way she'd done most things. Gloria called me at 6:43. I was already dressed. I drove out to the farmhouse before Karen was awake, stood in the doorway of the bedroom for a moment, and said goodbye in a way I'd been practicing in my head for months, silently, with my hand on the doorframe and the gray light coming through the curtains. I made the calls that needed making. The funeral home, Norman's office, the co-op's administrative coordinator, a capable woman named Bev who had worked with Marlene for 18 years, and took the news in silence before thanking me and hanging up. I did all of this from the kitchen of Marlene's house, sitting at the table where she and I had reviewed documents and talked about drainage systems and drunk more cups of coffee than I could count. Karen arrived at 9:30 with Cindy and Rita. She cried in the driveway, loudly, briefly, and then walked into the house and began assessing the furniture. I went back to the farm. The funeral was held 4 days later at First Methodist in Callaway County, a building Marlene had attended for 61 years. About 40 people came. Co-op members, neighbors, the church secretary who had organized Marlene's Wednesday Bible study for a decade, Dale Hutchins, who was thinking of retiring from the co-op, came with his wife and stayed the whole time. Mr. and Mrs. Arbuckle from the adjacent property, both in their 80s, sat in the third pew and wept without embarrassment. Karen wore designer black and worked the room near the flower arrangements with the focused energy of someone running for office. Cindy and Rita flanked her like a security detail. At one point, I heard Karen tell the pastor's wife that her mother had been her closest confidant and that she planned to honor her legacy with everything she had. The pastor's wife nodded politely. She'd known Marlene well enough to parse that. Zach sat with Taylor and me near the back. He didn't perform grief. He just sat there with his hands folded and his jaw set, the way he'd learned to absorb hard things, quietly, completely, without theater. At one point he leaned toward me and said in a low voice, "She knew, didn't she? Everything she was doing, she knew exactly why." "She did," I told him. He nodded and looked back at the front of the church. Chance came late, slid into the pew beside Taylor, and spent most of the service with his arms crossed and his eyes on Karen. At the reception afterward, he pulled me aside near the coat rack. "Mom says the will reading is next week," he said. His tone was careful but loaded, the tone he used when he was delivering a message on behalf of someone else. "I know," I replied. "She says things are going to be straightforward." He paused. "She says you shouldn't expect complications." I looked at my son for a moment. 33 years old, smart enough to know he was being used as a messenger and choosing to do it anyway. "Tell your mother I'm not expecting anything," I said calmly. "I'm just going to show up." After the reception, as the parking lot cleared, I noticed Dalton Reeves near the side entrance in a dark coat, talking quietly with Karen. He was young, 39, but he carried himself like a man who'd never been surprised by anything. I watched him nod at something Karen said. He had no idea what was in Norman's office. No idea what was filed in Franklin County. No idea whose name was typed in the margin of a document he hadn't seen yet. I buttoned my coat, shook Dale Hutchins' hand on the way out, and drove home. That evening, alone in my office, I finally opened the envelope from the bottom of the fireproof box. Marlene's handwriting covered 2 pages. No greeting, no signature. She never wasted words that way. Just her thoughts, written in that careful cursive, telling me things I already knew and some things I didn't. She wrote about the year the co-op nearly folded, about Alice, and what it meant to her that I'd taken Zach without being asked, about Karen, not with anger, but with the clear-eyed disappointment of someone who had tried a long time to see something that wasn't there. The last paragraph was short. "You never needed my approval, Harold, but for what it's worth, you had it. Every year, every season, every time you showed up when nobody else did. This land should be in hands that understand it. I'm trusting you to keep it that way." I folded the pages carefully, put them back in the envelope, and added it to the box. Then I picked up my phone and sent a one-line text to Norman. "See you Thursday." He replied in 3 minutes. "Ready when you are." The fire was going by 7. Karen had ordered pizza. She hadn't cooked since before Marlene passed. And after Chance ate and left to meet friends in town, she and Cindy and Rita migrated out to the back patio with a bottle of Prosecco and the fire pit I'd built by hand 8 years ago from fieldstone I'd pulled out of the east drainage channel. I ate alone at the kitchen table, cleaned up, poured a glass of water, and settled into the chair on the side porch where the wraparound gave me a clean angle to the fire pit without being visible. I hadn't planned it. I just went where the quiet was. The wine had been flowing since before dinner. Their voices carried easily on the cold, still air. Cindy was talking about a deck she wanted added to her house. Who to hire, what materials, whether cedar or composite held up better in humidity. Rita had opinions on composite. Karen wasn't listening to either of them. I could tell by the way she was sitting, leaned back, glass tilted, looking up at the sky, that she was somewhere else entirely, planning something. Then Rita shifted the conversation. "Dalton called this afternoon," she said, keeping her voice light. "He said everything looks clean. 3-way split, land included, exactly like the original." Karen swirled her glass. "He also said Harold could theoretically claim spousal interest in the co-op shares." "Did he mention that?" "He mentioned it," Rita admitted. "He said it was manageable." "It's nothing," Karen said flatly. "Harold's name isn't on the estate filing. It's not on the primary trust. He's been drawing an agronomist salary for 30 years, and he thinks that entitles him to half of everything my mother built." She shook her head, the firelight catching the angles of her face. I'll run every joint account dry before he gets a foothold. By the time he figures out what's happening, it'll already be sorted. Cindy raised her glass. To sorting things out. Rita laughed. Karen's smile was slow and satisfied. The smile of someone who'd already won a game the other player didn't know was being played. I didn't move from my chair. I didn't write anything down. I just sat there in the dark with the cold settling around me and let the audio recorder on my phone do its job. I'd started it before I sat down. Old habit, built from years of documenting field conditions and co-op negotiations. After a while, Rita said, "What about Taylor?" A brief pause. Karen took a sip. "Taylor will come around. She just needs time to understand which side has the resources." And Zach. The pause before Karen's answer was longer. Something shifted in her posture. "Zach," she said slowly, "is not our concern. He's not Belle. He was never legally part of this family. Whatever Harold wants to do for him, that's Harold's private business." Cindy said nothing. Rita said nothing. Even the fire seemed to go quieter for a moment. I set my phone down on the armrest and looked up at the sky. Cold and clear, stars sharper than usual. Zach was 27 years old. He'd been with us since he was 5. He'd sat at that same fire pit 100 times on summer evenings, learning to whittle, learning to read, planting charts, learning how to be a person in the world. He had his mother's eyes and his grandmother's patience, and absolutely no idea that the woman who'd shared a roof with him for 22 years had just called him someone else's private business. I picked up my phone, checked the recording level, and set back down. Then my phone buzzed with a text from Norman's office. His assistant had sent the confirmed agenda for Thursday. Per Mr. Ellsworth's instruction, Mr. Easton speaks after the primary reading. Water will be at the table. I typed back, "Thank you. We'll be ready." Across the yard, Karen was refilling her glass and talking about what kind of wood flooring looked best in a farmhouse renovation. She had it all planned out. The aesthetic, the timeline, the budget that wasn't hers yet. Rita mentioned the weather for Thursday would be cold. "Doesn't matter," Karen said lightly. "Thursday's going to be a good day." She had no idea how right she was. Dalton Reeves spent the 2 days before the reading reviewing documents he thought he understood. I know this because Norman told me afterward, and because the email Dalton sent me at 11:17 on Tuesday night confirmed it. The subject line was brief: estate matter, urgent clarification needed. The body was 4 sentences. He had encountered an unexpected designation in the estate supplement. He wanted to understand my role in the Bell estate. He was requesting clarification before the Thursday reading. He would appreciate a response at my earliest convenience. I read the email twice, set my phone face down on the desk, and went to bed. In the morning, I drafted a reply. 3 sentences. I acknowledged his message, confirmed I was aware of the relevant documents, and attached 3 files: the amended co-op charter with my co-founder designation, the notarized trustee supplement, and the Franklin County Registry confirmation with its timestamp. No explanation, no apology, no offer to discuss. He called within 20 minutes. I let it go to voicemail. His voicemail was 6 minutes long and covered, in polished legal language, approximately 5 different ways of asking the same question. Who are you? And how did this happen? He mentioned that the document appeared legitimate. He mentioned that the notary stamp was valid. He mentioned, with what I recognized as carefully managed alarm, that the conditional clause had very specific trigger language and that he needed to understand whether that language applied to the current situation. I transcribed the key phrases into my notepad, added it to the fireproof box, and drove to Norman's office. Norman had coffee ready. He was 69 years old and had been practicing estate law in this county since before Karen was born, and he had the particular calm of someone who had seen every kind of family come apart over money and was no longer surprised by any of it. We went through the Thursday agenda one final time. The primary reading would cover the personal bequests first, the small, symbolic items Marlene had designated for her daughters. Then the estate assets. Then Norman would introduce the supplement. I would speak after the supplement was read. "Dalton's going to challenge the conditional clause," I said. Norman nodded without concern. "He'll try. The clause is airtight." The trigger language was witnessed, notarized, and cross-referenced to the audio documentation you filed with me last month. He folded his hands on the desk. "He has no footing. And the co-op charter? Your name has been on that charter since 1993. Co-founder designation, active and uninterrupted. It predates the marriage. It predates the estate filing. It predates everything Karen thinks she owns. He looked at me steadily. That document alone answers Dalton's question about who you are. I drove home through the gray November morning and sat in my truck in the driveway for a moment before going inside. Karen was at the kitchen table with her laptop open, scrolling through interior design sites. She'd been doing this more frequently, planning renovations to a house she didn't own yet, decorating a life she hadn't inherited. She glanced up briefly when I came in. "Norman's office?" she said. "Routine," I replied, pouring coffee. She went back to her screen. "Dalton called me this morning. He said there might be a minor document issue to sort out before Thursday. Something clerical." She said it lightly, the way you'd mention a scheduling conflict. He said not to worry about it. I drank my coffee by the window. Outside, the bare trees along the property line stood absolutely still. No wind. The sky was the color of old pewter. "Good advice," I said. That evening, Zach came by the house to pick up some equipment manuals he needed for a co-op vehicle he was servicing. He came through the back door the way he always had. Knock once, then enter, and found me at the kitchen table going through field yield reports. He sat across from me without being asked. That was something I'd always respected about Zach. He didn't perform casualness. He just was. "Thursday," he said. Not a question, not quite a statement. "Thursday," I confirmed. He looked at the table for a moment. "Am I going to be okay?" "After." I set down my pen and looked at him directly. "Marlene put you in the co-op charter by designation. Agronomist of record. I'm formalizing it after Thursday. You're not just okay. You're protected." Something shifted in his face. Not relief, exactly. More like a long-held tension releasing so slowly it was almost invisible. "She did that," he said quietly. "She actually did that. She told me last month. She said you drove her to 4 appointments last spring." He looked away. "It was nothing. It was everything to her," I said. "That's why she did it." He picked up the equipment manuals, stood up, and paused at the back door. "Whatever happens Thursday, I'll be there." "I know," I told him. "Bring Taylor." He nodded and walked out into the cold. I watched the truck lights move down the access road and disappear. I went back to my desk, opened my laptop, and sent Dalton Reeves a final email. 2 lines. "Mr. Reeves, I'll answer your question in person on Thursday. Bring a notepad." I hit send and closed the laptop. The conference room at Norman's office smelled like old paper and central heating and the particular tension that fills a space when everyone present knows the outcome is going to hurt at least some of them. Karen arrived first, in black wool and the new necklace, Cindy and Rita behind her like a formation. They took the 3 chairs on the left side of the table. Dalton came in 30 seconds later, set a leather folio on the table, and did not look at me when I walked in and took the chair at the far end. I was the last one seated. I timed it that way. Norman opened without ceremony. He confirmed the document, confirmed the date, confirmed the presence of all relevant parties. Then he began. The personal bequest came first. Karen received Marlene's pearl brooch, the one her father had given Marlene on their 20th anniversary. Cindy received a cedar hope chest from the upstairs bedroom. Rita received the hand-quilted blanket from the sitting room. Karen's expression when the brooch was named was a masterclass in poorly concealed disappointment. She'd been expecting the lead item in a much larger list. Her eyes moved to Dalton. He gave her a small, controlled nod that said wait. Norman turned the page. "The Bell Estate's primary assets," he said, "including the farmland, co-op voting shares, equipment holdings, and residual operating accounts, are addressed in the estate's supplement dated June 3rd of this year." He removed a document from the folder and set it flat on the table. "This supplement supersedes the asset distribution provisions of the original while under the conditions specified in Appendix C." Karen sat forward. "What supplement?" Norman didn't pause. "Appendix C establishes a conditional clause. In the event of demonstrated entitlement behavior, defined as verbal or documented planning to exploit, diminish, or dispossess the designated co-founder of the Bell Organics Co-op, the primary estate assets transfer in full to the successor trustee." He looked up. "That trustee is Harold M. Easton." The silence lasted about 4 seconds. Then Karen's voice came out sharp and high. "That is not valid. That document does not exist. It was filed June 3rd. Norman said evenly, notarized by Rosemary Kinfield, whose commission is valid through 2028 and cross-registered in Franklin County. I have the registry confirmation here. He placed a second document on the table. Dalton leaned forward, his earlier composure fracturing at the edges. He pulled the supplement toward him and read it quickly, his finger moving down the page. His color changed. He looked up at me for the first time since I'd walked in. "I don't understand," he said slowly, and I could hear in his voice that he meant it. "Who is he? What is his standing in this estate?" I reached into my coat, pulled out the yellow legal pad, and set it on the table. On top of it lay a single document, the original Bell Organics Co-op Charter, signed in 1993, with two names on the founding line. Marlene R. Bell. Harold M. Easton. "I'm the co-founder," I said. "I've been the co-founder for 31 years. And I'm the man your client called an employee at a fire pit 3 weeks ago." I slid my phone across the table to Norman, who plugged it into the small speaker on the credenza. Karen's voice filled the room. Clear, unhurried, certain. "I'll run every joint account dry before he gets a foothold." Karen went still. Cindy looked at the table. Rita's mouth opened and then closed. Norman stopped the recording and removed it from the speaker. "The conditional clause," he continued, "has been activated by the documented evidence submitted in advance of this reading. All primary estate assets transfer to Harold M. Easton as successor trustee, effective today." Karen stood up, so fast her chair rolled back and hit the wall. "This is manipulation. This is elder abuse." She was not in her right mind when she signed this. Norman reached for a third document. Her physician filed a competency statement in September, 8 weeks before her death. Marlene requested it herself. He placed it on the table. She was, in her physician's professional assessment, entirely lucid and fully capable of legal decision-making at the time of signing. Dalton sat back in his chair. He looked like a man who had just walked confidently into a room and found the floor missing. Karen turned to me. Her voice had dropped to something low and unsteady. "You did this behind my back. You manipulated a dying woman." I looked at her without raising my voice. "I showed up," I said. "Every time, for 31 years, I showed up. You want to know who manipulated who? Look at your credit card statements from the past 18 months. Look at the account in the bank 3 counties over." I let that land. "I have copies of both." The room went very quiet. Dalton closed his folio. His next client was going to need a stronger case than this one. The drive home from Norman's office was 11 minutes. I know because I counted them. Not intentionally, just the way your mind finds small things to hold on to when larger ones are still settling. Karen didn't come home that night. She went to Cindy's, which I learned from a text she sent at 6:15. "Staying with Cindy. Need space." I read it once and set my phone down. Taylor came over at 7. She let herself in with her key, found me at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee and the co-op field reports I'd been meaning to review for 2 days, and sat across from me without taking off her coat. "Chance called me," she said. "I figured he would." She was quiet for a moment, her hands flat on the table. "He's furious." "I know. He said you manipulated Grandma Marlene, that you worked the situation behind everyone's backs." She paused. "He said some other things too. I'm not going to repeat them." I looked at my daughter, 28 years old, with Marlene's gray eyes and the habit of measuring everything twice before she spoke. "What do you think?" I asked. She met my eyes steadily. "I think I haven't seen Mom at that farmhouse in 3 years. I think Grandma Marlene called me last January and asked how Zach was doing before she asked about anyone else." Taylor pulled her coat tighter. "I think I watched you cook every holiday dinner for the last decade, while Mom planned what she was going to spend." She shook her head. "I don't think you manipulated anybody. We sat together for a while after that. I made more coffee." She looked through the field reports with me. She'd grown up on this land and knew it the way she knew her own handwriting. We talked about the spring planting schedule, about the co-op contracts that needed renewal, about the ordinary machinery of the work that was still there regardless of what the day had held. At 9 o'clock, Zach knocked on the back door. He came in and poured himself coffee and sat with us. Nobody needed a debrief. The 3 of us just sat there at the kitchen table while the night pressed against the windows, and that was enough. The next morning I called Chance directly. He picked up on the 4th ring, already loaded. "You had no right," he said, not bothering with a greeting. "I had every right," I replied, keeping my voice level. "My name has been on that co-op charter since before you were born." Your grandmother made a legal decision with full competency and full documentation. If you want to contest that, you'll need a lawyer and a very different set of facts. She was sick. You took advantage. Chance. My voice didn't rise, but it sharpened. The last time you visited your grandmother was 14 months ago. I was there every week. I drove her to appointments. I fixed what broke. I showed up when showing up was inconvenient. A pause. Don't lecture me about taking advantage. Silence on the line. Long enough to mean something. Your mother is going to face legal consequences for the financial activity in her joint accounts. I continued. That's not something I'm doing to her. That's something she did. When you're ready to talk about where we go from here as a family, I'm available. But I'm not going to apologize for what your grandmother decided. Chance hung up without responding. I set the phone down and went back to my field reports. 3 days later, Brooke Easton, the paralegal I'd hired, not my daughter Taylor, though the name coincidence had struck me as fitting, delivered her completed financial audit. 47 pages. Every unauthorized transfer documented, dated, and sourced. The account in the bank 3 counties over. The credit card activity. The pattern of small withdrawals over 26 months, totaling just under $61,000. I handed the audit to a family law attorney named Greta Hollis, who had been recommended by Norman, and who had the efficient, unsentimental manner of someone who dealt in facts rather than feelings. She reviewed it the same afternoon. This is civil and potentially criminal territory, she told me plainly. Marital asset concealment. We file for divorce, we attach the audit, and we let the numbers do what numbers do. I authorized her to proceed. Rita called that evening. Not Karen, not Cindy, but Rita, the youngest of the 3. She didn't come in swinging. She sounded tired. I want you to know, she said carefully, that I didn't know about the accounts. I knew about the plan to contest the will. I didn't know Karen had been moving money. I believe you, I said. And I did. Is there anything? She stopped. Started again. Is there any version of this where things don't get completely destroyed? I thought about that honestly before I answered. For you and Cindy, probably yes. For Karen, she's the one who made the choices she made. That has a cost. Rita was quiet for a moment. She's my sister. I know, I said. And she's been my wife for 31 years. That doesn't change what she did. I heard her exhale. She said goodbye. I said goodbye. We hung up. I sat in the office for a while after that, listening to the house. It was quiet in a different way than it had been before. Not the quiet of a life being managed around someone else's noise, but the quiet of a space that was genuinely still. 8 months is a long time when you're rebuilding. It's also no time at all. The divorce was finalized in late spring, which felt appropriate. Things ending as other things were beginning. Greta Hollis was as efficient as advertised. The financial audit made the proceedings considerably less complicated than Karen's attorney had anticipated. The hidden account was ordered repaid to marital assets. The credit card balances were assigned to Karen. The co-op assets were already mine by estate designation and untouchable by the divorce proceedings, which Dalton Reeves had apparently explained to Karen before she found someone else to represent her. She kept the house furniture she'd chosen and a settlement that was fair, if not generous. She moved to a condo in a town 40 minutes north where Cindy lived. I heard, through Taylor, that she'd gotten a part-time position at a property management company. I didn't ask for more details than that. Chance took 4 months to come around. It wasn't a dramatic conversion. No big speech. No formal apology. He showed up at the farm on a Sunday in March, watched Zach and me work on the north field drainage for 2 hours without saying much, and then helped us finish the section we were on. We ate sandwiches on the tailgate of my truck. Chance asked about the spring contracts. I told him. That was how it started. Taylor had never left. She was at the farm 2 or 3 evenings a week, reviewing soil reports, helping with co-op correspondence, learning the financial structure that would eventually be hers to manage. She had Marlene's methodical mind and was already better at the administrative side of things than I'd ever been. Zach was formally designated agronomist of record in February, per the co-op charter amendment. He didn't make a fuss about it. He came into my office, signed the paperwork, shook my hand, and went back to the field. That was Zach. In April, I announced the establishment of the Alice Easton Memorial Agricultural Scholarship, funded by 30% of the first year's estate distributions, designated for students pursuing degrees in agronomy or sustainable farming from Callaway County. Norman handled the legal structure. Zach attended the announcement at the co-op meeting and sat in the back row with his arms folded and his jaw set and his eyes very bright. I didn't make a speech. I just introduced the scholarship, explained the funding, and thanked the co-op members for their patience through the previous year. That was all. I opened Marlene's letter one more time in May, sitting on the porch of the farmhouse. My farmhouse now, legally and completely, in the early morning before the workday started. I'd read it a dozen times by then and knew most of it by heart. But I read it again anyway, slowly, in the good light. You never needed my approval, Harold. But for what it's worth, you had it. Every year, every season, every time you showed up when nobody else did. I folded it back into the envelope and slid it into my jacket pocket. The east field was greening up. The drainage system I'd rebuilt 26 years ago was holding perfectly. The hawk, or a hawk, maybe a different one, maybe the same, was working the fence line along the south edge, exactly where it had been the last time I'd sat in Marlene's kitchen. The land didn't know what the winter had cost. It just kept doing what land does, turning, opening, offering the next season to whoever was willing to work it.